Hi, my name is Anthony Albanese, and this is my Technology Application Podcast. I'm going to be talking about the effectiveness of body armor in the fields of military and law enforcement. Although it's important to note that body armor has been widely used as a vital form of protection, it does have its flaws. I'm going to be discussing various studies that have been conducted in relation to body armor, and ultimately, with all these factors considered, come to a determination of whether or not body armor truly is an effective piece of equipment. The very first topic to discuss is the history of body armor. Many attempt to look back and date precisely when body armor came into use. It was actually first utilized by the early existence of man. They would hunt and then kill their prey for nourishment, and with the animal skins create a protective piece of clothing, which could then be used in the combatants of other humans. Essentially, mankind used whatever they could to create an efficient form of protection for themselves. When animal skins weren't readily available, anything from moss to wood were strongly utilized. It wasn't until the medieval Japanese that we started to see other forms of body armor begin to surface. The illustration in the background depicts a medieval warrior wearing a silk vest. Lastly, the Middle Ages brought vast amounts of new material which allowed for newly constructed body armor to be created. It's important to note that some of the materials being used at that time period are still in use today. It may come as no surprise, but body armor must undergo rigorous testing and must satisfy certain standards. These standards are set forth and conducted by the National Institute of Justice. They analyze the two types of body armor in use today, which are ballistic-resistant body armor and stab-resistant body armor. Ballistic-resistant armor is intended to protect against anything from small-caliber weapons to rifles, depending on the classification type, which I will get into shortly. And stab-resistant armor is intended to deflect or break any sharp objects, whether it be a knife or a prison-made shank. As mentioned before, there are different classification levels for the two types of body armor, which increase as the level of threat rises. A good example of this is shown in the chart, which only applies to ballistic-resistant armor, where we can see Type 1 being able to handle low-caliber weapons like the .22 caliber handgun, while Type 4 can handle higher-velocity projectiles. On a side note, I should mention that the Type 2A is most commonly worn by law enforcement officials nationwide. Also, the Type 3A offers the highest level of protection for an individual while maintaining that the armor is concealed under the clothing. Unlike ballistic-resistant armor, classification levels for stab-resistant armor are measured in joules, or the energy equal to the work done by a specific force. In this case, that force would be the individual holding the sharp instrument. Because stab-resistant armor is so unique, it only has 3 classification levels. Level 1 is capable of withstanding 24 joules, Level 2 is capable of withstanding 33 joules, and Level 3 is capable of defeating 43 joules, which is equivalent to 380 pounds per inch. Now that we have a clear understanding for the standards and classification levels for body armor, let's discuss one of the most important factors that the National Institute of Justice must consider when manufacturing these vests, the 44mm standard. Although body armor is commonly praised for its life-saving capabilities, various studies have been conducted, all attempting to shed light on the 44mm standard. Well, first off, what is the 44mm standard? When a bullet travels through the air and hits a vest, some of the kinetic energy is transferred to the armor. It is the decision of the National Institute of Justice that a projectile may not penetrate a vest, no matter the material, more than 44mm, so as not to cause death or serious bodily injury to the individual wearing that vest. The study is intended to prove that perhaps the standard should be raised to avoid any further injuries. To put these cases in perspective, here is an officer who faced BABT, behind armor blunt trauma, also referred to as a back-face signature injury. For the first study, the BABT evaluation involved placing Kevlar ballistic-resistant armor on euthanized goats and firing 38 and .22 caliber projectiles at random locations of the body. Careful consideration was given to the depth at which the bullets were able to penetrate. None were over the NIJ's 44mm standard. Although all of the goats survived the testing, serious damage was done to all of their vital organs. Although effectively saving their lives, the body armor did not protect against serious bodily harm. Researchers speculated that the 44mm standard should be reconsidered because it lacks the ability to assess injury level or probability of injury. The second study, which examined backface signature injuries, called for a more aggressive approach. Unlike the previous study, researchers would now use higher velocity projectiles. 18 euthanized pigs, all wearing ballistic resistant armor, were placed into two groups. 8 pigs would be shot at with a standard rifle at a further distance to allow for a 34mm impression, and the same gun would be used at a closer range to allow for a 44mm impression. Here's an illustration of how each pig was set up. The results yielded 7 deaths as a result from severe trauma. Once again, this study confirmed that more factors should be considered when determining an effective millimeter limit. Such factors include the projectile velocity, body mass, gender, and location of impact. To date, no changes have ever been made to the standards set forth by the National Institute of Justice. So far, the studies I've spoken about tend to focus more on the negative components of the vest, but no consideration has been made to the individual wearing that vest. The next study discusses another downside to body armor, its weight and bulkiness. To prove this point, 52 males were chosen from a police force in Australia. These men were then given 5 mobility tasks to complete: a balance task, an acceleration task that simulated exiting a vehicle, chin-ups, a grappling task, and a maneuverability task. To finish off, the men were then told to complete a 5-mile treadmill run. To allow for fair testing, the study was first completed with the men wearing no vests, and then wearing stab-resistant vests the second time around. The comparisons were shocking. The results yielded a significant decrease in the physical performance of all 52 males. Researchers also discovered a change in the attitudes of these young men, possibly due to a psychological change. Researchers explained that this could simply be a normal human being's response to failure. Although no bullets were fired at the vests in this experiment, one thing was for certain. Researchers concluded that body armor greatly reduces a person's mobility during tasks deemed normal to a law enforcement official. So let's recap. 3 studies have been conducted, all attempting to reveal body armor's negative aspects. Although it's been proven that body armor affects a person's mobility and that injuries are indeed possible regardless of the vest being worn correctly, we still do not have a clear-cut answer as to whether or not body armor truly is an effective piece of equipment. The next study leaves out all experimentation and sticks to the facts. Statistics from police shootings in the United States from 2004 to 2007 were gathered. The study would review the data and calculate the risk of death from a gunshot with and without the use of body armor. Because the study was trying to determine the risk of death, only torso shots were taken into consideration. The data revealed that the relative risk of a cop dying without the use of body armor is around 95%. However, applying the same equation to those wearing vests, the relative risk dramatically decreases. Here is a graph used in the study to note the changes. With such a drastic difference, we can affirm that when it comes to body armor, it is a truly effective piece of equipment. Now that we have established that body armor is indeed an effective piece of equipment, let us look to other factors that we need to be mindful of. I placed the background image of money because the cost of armor is obviously something that we need to consider. A national average shows that a typical protective vest costs around $560 per year. However, most agencies tend to buy body armor in bulk, typically every 5 years. So one may still ask themselves, is it really worth all that money? Well, keeping in mind that the study which performed this comparison values an officer's life, which is based on everything from salary, disability compensation, and life insurance coverage, to approximately $6 million. By simply calculating these numbers, it is clear why one should protect the value of the other. To put this in perspective, simple mathematics show that with approximately 800,000 law enforcement personnel working in the United States, the value is over $4 trillion. whereas the cost of protecting each of these individuals is just under $500 million every 5 years, or simply $89.6 million annually. The decision is obvious. Now that I have explained just about every possible angle of body armor, let me state one very harsh but obvious reality. The jobs of a law enforcement official and military personnel are extremely dangerous. Now that has sunk in, let me first say that there are always going to be potential risks involved in public safety careers. An individual choosing this career path must think long and hard and decide if this is truly something they really want to do. If, for whatever reason, you are still on the fence about joining a law enforcement agency and you are unsure about the capabilities body armor has to offer, consider this. Body armor saves, on average, about 8.5 lives each year. And since its inception, the use of soft body armor has saved over 2,900 lives. So this concludes my presentation on the effectiveness of body armor, all factors considered. I hope you learned something and got a grasp on the basic knowledge of ballistic and stab-resistant body armor. And lastly, I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thank you.